Ladies and gentlemen all across Guyana and wherever you're joining us from, welcome to Room 592, where we unleash the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a fantastic yet disappointing 121, 122 days. It's the type of times and the type of days we may prefer to read about, but not to experience. It's the kind of lackluster leadership and lackluster politics that we prefer to read about or to see in a serial, but not to experience. Unfortunately for us, we are very much experiencing it every day. And so as we continue to analyze what's happening in this lovely country of ours, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you once again to Room 592, and I want to remind you all that regardless of what is happening in the politics, this is still the best country in the world and made of the best people of the world. And let us remember, the power to unite together, the power to put aside racism, the power to put aside and teach politicians a lesson resides with you and I, and not with your political leader. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been nightly that Leonard Gildari and yours truly have been reminding you that we got to tell the politicians they are servants to the public. They are earning our taxpayers' money, and when they do not do as per the will of the people, we must call them out. And so we continue to analyze what's happening here, ladies and gentlemen. And today, I must tell you, I'm honored and privileged to have with us here tonight a distinguished personality. I call my brother Selwyn Peiters someone who is distinguished in many ways. And I'm not saying this, I'll tell you, I've never had a conversation with my brother, but I've read about him. I know him for a man that he is in terms of his writings and his cases. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to share with you this about Mr. Peiters. I want to tell you that Mr. Peiters, he has his law degree. He could practice law in Ontario, Canada. He could practice law in Guyana. He could practice law in Trinidad and Tobago. And virtually by him being part of the Commonwealth, it would take little, if any effort at all, for him to practice law in any of our Commonwealth countries. But I leave that distinguishing trait up to him. His father was one of the first general secretaries of the People's National Congress. Mr. Peiters was co-counsel with Nigel Hughes for the Alliance for Change when they had to represent those deceased family at the Linden Commission of Inquiry, 2012-2013. Mr. Peiters was also co-counsel with Brian Clark for the Guyana Trades Union Congress at the Walter Rodley Commission. And this is something, as I keep promising readers, viewers and listeners, one day we'll have to have a discussion on that Walter Rodney Commission of Inquiry. Ladies and gentlemen, this distinguished gentleman has also served as counsel for the People's National Congress when Basil Williams was appointed Attorney General and provided His Excellency David Granger with legal advice and counsel on the Walter Rodney file. He represented the Guyana Prison Service, the Guyana Police Force, and the Guyana Fire Service, the joint services, in that commission of inquiry that looked at the Camp Street prison disturbances. And those of you who would have seen his presentations during that commission of inquiry would have seen that he was very much outspoken, and the words still ring in my ears, him telling the commission of inquiry that, you know, what you have there, some wooden relics, is exactly what they are, relics, and you need to have proper facilities. This gentleman, ladies and gentlemen, was co-counsel for Minister of State Joe Harmon in the libel claim, 13 libels against, guess who, Leonard?
Let me make a wild guess.
Against
me? No, I don't know that.
This in 2016. And in 2018, he was the co-counsel for the Attorney General with Kamal Ramkhan, a landmark case, if I may say so myself, and Kim Kite in the McEwan and others versus the Attorney General of Guyana at the Caribbean Court of Justice. This, as viewers and listeners would recall, was, as we say in Guyana, the case that dealt with the cross-dressing and transgender issues. And it really brought the whole community, the LGBTQ community, into the realm of human rights. He was also one of the lawyers, as I said, that would have been part of the Walter Rodney Commission of Inquiry. And wouldn't you know, Leonard, Mr. Peiters was also, and I think he still is, vice president of the Toronto Center of Learning and Development. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who like to read, I would encourage you. This gentleman has written, he has co-authored a piece that is called Data Collection, Race and Justice in Canada, Alchemical Reflections in 2012, in which he has used negative experiences meted out to him, negative things meted out to him as the genesis to fight for the rights and write about the rights of others. And interestingly, in the State versus Gravesandi, he looked at authored an article using public interest remedies to impact cultural change. And here too, he used and brought in his own life experiences to lecture and to present change and what changes can be brought to the world. And I want to there's so much we can talk about. I'm excited, and Selwyn Peiters, and then we got to talk about Selwyn Peiters, not about what's happening in Guyana. But I want to top it off, ladies and gentlemen, by saying this. 7 to 8 years ago, this gentleman on screen, Mr. Selwyn Peiters, made headlines in his human rights case against the Court of Appeal for Ontario, Canada. In that case, Mr. Peiters and another, they basically took the association to court for racial profiling, racial discrimination. And those of you who have read Mr. Peiters' writings and his expression of his opinion, he does not use words lightly. He uses his words with the care that you know that this is an attorney speaking, but it's very impactful. Ladies and gentlemen, this gentleman has said, make 1,000 allegations without a shred of evidence and hope that the misguided, misinformed, and gullible fall for it. He certainly has a way with words. Mr. Selwyn Peiters, sir, welcome to room 592. You're muted, sir. You're muted. Still can't hear you.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Dr. Yog, and you really did your research. I'm actually impressed. My goodness.
Well, we are impressed with the work you have done, Mr. Peiters. And if we may, we'll just abandon the mister for tonight. You are in the room with colleagues and friends who like you. So, Selwyn, we are all impressed. And I tell you what, it's gentlemen like you that makes Guyanese and Guyana proud, sir. So welcome once again. And let us get on with our discussion for tonight. I would like, if you don't mind, Mr. Peiters, I would like for you to kindly start the ball going. What was in Selwyn Peiters' mind when you undertook what, from my perspective, was a monumental stairway to climb with that human rights case in Ontario, when you and your colleagues were racially profiled and discriminated?
Well, the Peel Law Association case versus Peiters, which certainly makes Peiters a household name and a human rights name. That case was a case about dignity. That case was about Black lawyers feeling at home. And one thing that you must know about that case is the other litigant is actually my first cousin. Mm-hmm. His father and my mother are brother and sister. So we're both Guyanese lawyers. And the student that was with us was a Bajan. Mm-hmm. And we were there in a very big case. We were there in a very high profile case. So there were lots of lawyers in the lawyers' lounge. And this librarian sought to challenge us on our bona fides, whether we were entitled to be there or not. Mm-hmm. Because the way she saw it is we were either members of the public or paralegals and didn't deserve to be there. I mean, it was humiliating, and we felt that her conduct. I mean, how blunt she was, how direct she was, how the posture of entitlement with which she approached us, with which she wouldn't have approached a white lawyer in a lawyer's launch. It called for a significant challenge.
Yes.
And it cost a lot of money, but what it did is it restored our dignity in a fundamental way. And quite frankly, if we had lost that case, we couldn't even practice law in Ontario.
So true.
Because people would have looked at me and said, oh, he was crying wolf in the lawyer's lodge. He's playing the race card in the lawyer's lodge. So it was a fundamental case, but it's a case that established legal principles that are applicable across Canada. It's even been cited in New Zealand, Australia, and a few other places. It has established a fundamental analytical framework in terms of analyzing human rights matters.
Right. So I would want to suggest that one day after this whole elections brouhaha is out of the way, we need to sit with Mr. Peiters and others like you, sir, to really discuss cases like this and the impact, because one step at a time, but we are slowly building a society where all are respected. Mr. Peiters also would like to engage you in a discussion at another stage, of course, with your thoughts, because I found it very unique that in State versus Gravesandi, when you used also the racial profiling of the airports as one of the examples, and in approaching this case where somebody was Leonard, I don't know if you know this, I got to show off on Leonard a little bit, right? But Leonard here, a legal colleague of Mr. Peiters, I don't know if it's a colleague, but a legal person, another Guyanese attorney, was actually held for possession, but there was nothing. Even the search was improper. Everything was done outside of what would have been the accepted norm. And that case, Mr. Peiters ended up authoring an article that challenged again the norm for the establishment of human rights. Quick words on it, Counsel?
Yeah, that case was an important case because it showed we have systemic racism in our prisons, systemic anti-Black racism and racism against Indigenous persons. And it showed how Mr. Gravesandi, who is an outstanding lawyer of Guyanese heritage and birth, was targeted by these jail guards. I mean, anyone could have found themselves in his position. I could have found myself in his position if I went there to visit an inmate, if the inmate had hidden drugs and came into that waiting room to see me. And the first judge took a mindset that was antithetical to Mr. Gravesandi's right. And of course, the Court of Appeal overturned the judge's decision. Otherwise, Mr. Gravesandi would have been in a jail cell and lost his license to practice law.
There you go. Yep, absolutely. Well, I must tell you, Mr. Peiters, when we shared the news around that we're going to have you in room 592 tonight, one of your legal colleagues sent me a message saying, this man is a champ and he admires him, and to say hi to you. He called you a champ. He called you many, all good.
All good names.
All good names, Mr. Charandas Prasad. And he wanted me to say hello to you because he said you're well respected and he has a lot of respect for you as well.
And I do have a lot of respect for Charandas Prasad as well, because Charandas did something that very few in Guyana would have done. I mean, Charandas challenged the status quo. I mean, Charandas voted with his conscience. A lot of people made all kinds of spurious allegations against Charandas, but Charandas' vote was a vote that should have told the AP and new AFC, outside of the 90,000 people that didn't vote in the local government election, that all was not well, that there was something within the governance structure, even within the parliamentary ethos, that was not sitting well with people and parliamentarians as well. So I admired Charan Das because, of course, we know that this is more than 18 months, and he was one of the progenitors of everything that's happening.
Right.
And history will view him very well.
Of course. So, Mr. Peiters, you have also been, and ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Selwyn Peiters was an observer to these elections, one of the representatives of the Bar Association of Guyana. And so he has had first-hand experience being within the building and seeing the things that would have transpired there. Mr. Peiters, you have said, it is the will of the people, all the people, their votes must count. The will of the people must prevail. The political 1% elite does not own Guyana. It is owned by all of the citizens. Against that backdrop, sir, if you don't mind me asking you to relive an experience that you may not be the proudest moments of your life, can you tell us through your lens, what happened at the GECOM Center? Because as you know, Mr. Peiters, we have heard all narratives from all sides of this divide.
Well, there was a number of things that happened at the GECOM Center, and I mean, look, a lot of money was invested in these elections. Guyana budgeted billions of dollars in this election. We had three different former chief electoral officers from three different countries that came to Guyana to provide technical advice. We had the former chief electoral officer of Ghana, the former chief electoral officer of India, and the former chief electoral officer of Canada, Jean-Pierre Kingsley, who was one of the longest serving chief electoral officers here and highly respected. So it's not for the sake that GECOM did not have a significant and tremendous amount of resources that was put into this machinery to ensure that the elections were free, were fair, and was free from any fear. Right? So we had all that infrastructure in place. In addition, the ballots were printed in Canada and produced here to ensure the integrity of it.
Correct.
Right? So a lot was at stake in this election, and a lot went into it to make sure that the will of the people prevailed. I arrived in Guyana on the short-term observer schedule. So I'll see if it comes up here.
Yes.
So I arrived in Guyana on the 26th of February. And I left on the afternoon of the 5th of March, which was really the schedule that was set up for short-term observers. And so when I arrived on the 25th, I was, we had briefings with GECOM. Also, the different observer groups met together. So AmCham, the Guyana Bar Association, the business sector, private sector commission, etc. We all met so that resources can be pooled and people know where others were placed, so that people weren't congregating in one area and some areas were underserved. I attended political rallies, 2 rallies for the APNU AFC, 1 rally for the PPP in Loziknan. Their final rally in Loziknan I attended, plus I attended the PNC APNU AFC in Durban Park. All those rallies went well. There were no violence. I didn't see any political tensions between the parties. People were jubilant for all the sides, and the political leaders were respectful, as far as I saw.
Right.
Election day, there was a few incidents. There was one incident on West Demawara. There was an incident at Monrepo where people made the allegation of fake ID cards being distributed and all that sort of stuff. But that didn't turn out to anything. That was just political propagandizing. But everyone rushed down there. There was Amna Ali and Basil and all those people rushed down there. But that didn't turn out to be anything. I worked in Region 5, which is Mahaika Berbice, on election day. So I went down to Berbice and I observed the elections there. And the returning officer was professional. We had a lot of APNU, AFC, well, mostly PNC people who congregated outside of the regional office, but everything was peaceful. And we had no really untoward incidents. There was the tabulation that took place, and the tabulation was observed by the Carter Center, European Union, the Bar Association, the Private Sector Commission, and others, and everything was above board.
Right.
And when the recount was conducted, the numbers squared with what took place at the count or tabulation on elections day. I remained in Region 5 on the 3rd of March, and the count was completed in Region 5. I returned back to Region 4, Georgetown, and I started working at the GECOM Command Center on March 4th of 2020.
Right.
A lot of things took place that day. The first set of circumstances was, we got there very early in the morning. Most of the foreigners stayed at the Marriott, so there was a huge convoy from the Marriott to the GECOM Command Center, where all the chief electoral officer from Canada, the Carter Center people, myself from the Bar Association, we all traveled in a convoy over there, got there for about 8 o'clock in the morning, because the count was supposed to start, the tabulation was supposed to start early that morning. So we all got there at 8 o'clock for the count to start anywhere between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Nothing happened. We got there and we're just sitting around, standing around socializing, because GECOM isn't doing anything.
Right.
Close to 11 o'clock in the morning, we got word that Mr. Mingo apparently was ill. He was on the 3rd floor of the building in one of the offices.
Right.
Shortly after that, an ambulance came and wheeled him out with a mask on, an oxygen mask.
Right. Right.
We also heard that his deputy called in sick that day. And so people at that point was concerned about who is going to step up.
Correct.
Because here we are, and we want this process to continue. Right? It's done in most of the regions, because the numbers were coming in from most of the regions, and there were very few places left, and Region 4 was one of them. 1 o'clock, they restarted. There was issues with the spreadsheet that was used. People objected. The count stopped again. Between the count stopping and restarting shortly after 5, the political leaders from the parties came. So there was at least 2 former presidents in the room. Bharat Jagdeo was there, and Donna Ramatar were there. And there were other high echelon people of the PPP there. And Mr. Ali, who is a presidential candidate, was there as well.
Right.
The PNC had their high level people as well. So Valda Lawrence was there, Basil Williams was there, James Bond was there, and other political operatives were there. Outside of GECOM now, there was a whole bunch of AP and UFC supporters that mobbed out there. The media was there as well. But what was distasteful with respect to the media is GECOM set up, and I would imagine it was an expensive media center for the media. And yet on that day, they banned the media from entering the premises. So the media had to stand outside. So the media was not privy to most of what was happening inside, except if someone told them what was happening inside. So this is all on the 4th. So around let's say 6 o'clock in the evening, the GECOM chairman had to intervene because one of the females, well, two of them, said they weren't feeling well. And she came into the room and she pleaded for compassion. And there's nothing anyone could have done at that point. The count stopped. The count had started back briefly. It stopped at 6 o'clock. They told us they were going to start back around 10, 11 p.m. because they were going to find 2 substitute returning officers or 2 DROs to substitute. So we're all there at 11 o'clock. There were 2 DROs at GECOM Command Center sitting in a room.
Right.
Mr. Lowenfield shows up, and there are videos of all these things because I made videos and other people made videos because, objective evidence is important in these cases, especially where you have propaganda and misinformation prevailing. You want to have the direct evidence in the form of what you see and what you hear. So I made a lot of videos.
Correct.
Mr. Lowenfield shows up. When Mr. Lowenfield shows up, we don't know what discussion he had with the people in the 2 deputy returning officers in the room. But one of them sneaks through the back that led to the garage where the GECOM vehicles were parked and left. So now we don't have 2 deputy returning officers to continue the process. Mm-hmm. But what the PPP had done is they had called other DROs to come to the scene as well. So other DROs were there as well. And so when Lowenfield said, well, we don't have 2 DROs, there became the debate with Mr. Ali and Mr. Nandlal and Mr. Lowenfield and Mr. Mustafa. And all the observers were there. And what was interesting is if you look at the videos, you'll see about 30 or 40 cameras recording. All the foreign and local observers took their cameras out and they were recording everything that was said and everything that took place during the encounter with Mr. Ali and Mr. Lowenfield. And Mr. Lowenfield basically claimed that he could not trust the DROs that were there that the PPP had beside them. And these were his employees. Mm-hmm. These were his employees. Anyway, there was some negotiations that took place. Mm-hmm. And so he used one of the DROs that was there. So the recount started shortly after 1 a.m. in the morning on March 5th. When the recount restarted, the same shenanigans took place, where there was a complaint that people were tired. So one of the persons left, came back and took the computer and the flash drive, and there was some suspicions raised. Mm-hmm. So people went over to the room where the person entered, and much to their surprise, they found the 2 females that complained that they were tired at 6 p.m. and had to leave because they couldn't function anymore. They were still there at the command center.
Wow.
And this man was there that took the flash drive and the laptop that claimed that he couldn't function anymore. He was in the room with others working on the computer with the flash drive. And so the Guyana police force was called in. And so the assistant commissioner who was in charge of Region 4 came, and other officers came. And Lowenfield came back to the scene, and no one was arrested, but they were taken away. So the count effectively stopped.
Right.
Effectively stopped. Nothing of substance took place after the flash drive situation took place.
Correct.
So we all got there. I went back to my hotel, which was in Marriott, got some rest. And I got there around 9 o'clock in the morning. When I got there, the room was packed. A lot of observers were there. I don't know if some of them slept over.
Yeah.
But a lot of observers were there. The diplomats from all the embassies were there. Well, not all the embassies, but the major centers, or the major countries that were in Guyana: Canada, the United States, Great Britain, and the European Union. Their envoys were there, and all the political people were there. So you had the PPP people, led by Mr. Ali. He was there along with his people. Lennox Schulman was there with his people. The PNC or APNU, AFC. I say PNC because very few AFC persons were there. I didn't recognize the AFC leadership.
Right.
Most of the people that were there was the PNC leadership: Father Lawrence, Basil Williams, James Bond, and those people. Very few of the AFC people showed up. So some of them were there. The foreign minister showed up and said that she wanted to meet with the foreign observers and the diplomats, and actually led the way to a room in the GECOM command center. Obviously, somebody had to advise her of this room and that it was set up for her use, because the door was open, the lights were on, and the seats were assembled to hold all of the diplomats and the observers. So we were all there.
Wow.
And so she started speaking. And I mean, Dr. Cummins is trained in the art of diplomacy. And so Dr. Cummins didn't come out directly and say, look, my bosses are annoyed with the posture that they observe the foreign observers taken. And so the next step is to revoke the credentials. She didn't come out that way and said it. She said somebody whispered in her ears about revoking the credentials of the foreign observers. But she's not going to go there. Well, if you're not going to go there, why even speak about it?
Why mention it?
Right. Why mention it? She mentioned it for specific reasons. Right. Because she thought she was going to intimidate the observers that were present. And there was a lawyer in the room. Tenny Husty attempted to save her from herself. And he said, at this point, you may want to exit this meeting. But she didn't take the cue. She carried on. And so it brought on the ire of the British High Commissioner, who asked her whether it's even appropriate to have the meeting in that room and at that venue. Right? So he challenged her. Then the Canadian High Commissioner chimed in. I chimed in to ask her why she would make such a comment that on its face appeared intimidatory. The former Bajan Prime Minister, he was incensed at that point, so he took his observer badge off and actually was handing it back to her because he felt that bringing us up to that room and making that comment was the height of insult. But not only did that happen, but Roxanne Myers showed up. And the problem with Roxanne Myers is Roxanne Myers exhibit no diplomacy. Roxanne Myers showed up, handed the foreign minister a cell phone in the middle of our dialogue with the Bajan former prime minister, and then got her out of the room.
Wow.
And then told all of the assembled diplomats and foreign observers that they're in the wrong room. They have no place being in this room.
Wow.
So it's like you invite somebody to your house and then you kick them out. So it really set a bad and ominous tone for that day. The local politicians and the observers, most of them suspected something was happening, so they all rushed up and they were standing outside the door watching what was happening inside. We left after the Bajan Prime Minister expressed his disgust, went downstairs. Shortly after we got downstairs, we were told that there's a bomb threat that was made to the building and everyone has to evacuate. So the Assistant Commissioner of Police, who was in charge of Region 4, he communicated that message to the observers and the foreign diplomats assembled. And people decided, since there were the ballots inside that building, this is a ruse, this is a hoax to get people out of the building. And so a lot of people decided they were not leaving. And a lot of people stood their ground in there, even though, the police had their operation, the bomb dogs and so on came and were checking out the premises. We had the media as well. They didn't know what was going on.
Right.
I think I was the first one that sort of put the video out there because I realized the importance of what happened with the foreign minister. So I rushed back to my hotel and uploaded it to my Facebook, my Facebook page, and sent it to the media colleagues whose numbers I had in WhatsApp, send them the clips. So that clip went around, and then later on, they were full of clips of the entire meeting with the foreign minister. But I stayed outside during the bomb threat operation, and I left the center around, let's say 11:30, because I had to get back to the airport for 2:30 in the afternoon. I was leaving Guyana on March 5th to get back to Canada on March 6th. So I was in transit on March 5th in Trinidad for the afternoon. Right. So I left. I wasn't there for the declaration that afternoon and the sort of stuff that happened with with Justice Claudette Singh and Dr. Jagdeo and everybody else who were present, and Glenn Hanneman and the police and all that sort of stuff. Father Lawrence cursing out. I wasn't there for any of that. I was watching from my hotel in Trinidad. Got back to Canada on the 6th. I compiled a report of what I observed at GECOM, and I posted it on my Facebook page. Right?
Yeah.
And when I posted it on my Facebook page, I backed it up with objective evidence. I backed it up with reports. I backed it up with videos. I backed it up with audio. Everything I said, I backed up, simply because I wanted to be extremely careful. When I did that, I started getting death threats. Actually, I got death threats, whether it's on Facebook or whether it's through phone calls, and I was called all kinds of names. I was called a PPP stooge. I was called a sellout. I was called an Uncle Tom. I was called any number of names, and these were by very intelligent people. Very intelligent people who should have known better.
Right.
I mean, the PPP had more reason to challenge my bona fides as an observer than anyone else because of my close association and close affiliation with the PNC. Right?
Yes.
My association with the PNC was and still is close because most of my family are PNC. Right? I don't know any family members of mine that are PPP or belong to any other political party.
Right.
They're all PNC, and they all have and some continue to do work for the PNC. So you could imagine the uphill battle that Selwyn had, and had to stay the line when you're dealing with all the cuss outs, but you're also dealing with family members being pressured.
Of course.
Because Selwyn writing stuff on Facebook that we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't pressure Selwyn saying, I put pressure on the family members, thinking the family members could put any pressure on me.
Right.
So it hasn't worked because I was an objective, neutral observer. Mm-hmm. And I put my neutrality to the test by reporting accurately on what I saw and what I heard. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I said it before and I'm going to repeat it. I was not impressed. I was not impressed with the conduct of Mr. Lowenfield. I was not impressed with the conduct of Roxanne Myers. And I most certainly was not impressed by the conduct of Mr. Mingo. I mean, with all of the money that was spent, with all of the training and the capacity building that went on to make sure that we had a free, fair, credible, transparent, and independent election, the fact that we're sitting where we are 4 months later without a result, I mean, it certainly doesn't bode well for a democratic process and that independent constitutional body.
Correct. Well, Mr. Peiters, I must tell you, I mean, you've literally, I think you have brought chills with, telling us your experiences. It is, ladies and gentlemen, it is things that you and I would have seen via videos. This gentleman was there, and it is a first-hand. And those of you who are interested, indeed, on March 8th, if you go on Selwyn Peiters' Facebook page, you would find on March 8th, he would have described or built a report of everything that transpired during that period. And he would have buttressed that report with documents, videos. I went there and I can tell you I've seen some of the videos on his page that I didn't know existed before going there. There are some telling videos and I would encourage everyone to check it. Mr. Peiters, thank you. That you almost brought tears to my eyes, sir, because I think the one thing I may say, if I may say so, sir, is that we all care for this country so much. And everything we do is just wanting to see our children get a better day tomorrow. Sir, if we may fast forward a little bit, as you know and you would have seen following the news, we would have had Mingo making 2 declarations. We would have had Lowenfield present multiple reports to the commission. And as we are speaking tonight, we know that we are waiting for the CCJ's pronouncement on Wednesday coming. You are an attorney at law, and you practice, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Peiters did not only appear in front of the CCJ, he has argued and presented his case in Guyana. at the CCJ, that is in the Caribbean, and in Canada. And so, Mr. Peiters, having had this wideness of experience, if you may, sir, how would you, or what was Selwyn Peiters' thinking or analysis of the matters that recently went to the Court of Appeal and the Court of Appeal's handling of that matter? I know it's not nice, it's taboo kind of for a legal person to speak out against the court, but I know we got to speak out or say our opinion plainly, as you have been doing.
Well, in respect, you're talking about Eslin David.
Yes.
Eslin David versus
GECOM.
GECOM. I mean, the situation with the Court of Appeal right now is you see a split in the Court of Appeal. You saw that in the Yulita Moore matter as well, where Justice Rishi Prasad is dissenting, and you have Justice Barnes and whoever else sits with her, because it seems like she's always having somebody from the High Court sitting with her. There on one side, Justice Prasad is on the other side. You know, he has his own reasons, his own conclusions. We saw this in Eslin David matter.
And we saw it in the NCM case as well.
We saw it in the NCM case as well.
Yeah.
Right? But in this Eslin David case, I mean, we understand clearly that citizens have the right to access the courts. Right? So we can't knock whoever found Eslin David
absolutely
to appear as this litigant before the court. But what we know is that what we know about Eslin David is Eslin David I don't know if she still is. She was a market vendor who only a few years ago was aggrieved because she was uprooted from her business, like many others, and abused by the police.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know, well, what got into Eslin David's mind that she's now the nominal applicant in this important case. How did she reach to that stage? But regardless of how she reached to that stage, she was able to amass a panoply of very senior and experienced lawyers, not only from Guyana, but across the region. You know, how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so she's sort of the name behind an organization.
Right.
You know, when it's the PNC, the APNU, the AFC combined, she's the face of this test case litigation. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When you listen to the questions at the CCJ from Justice Jamadar, from the president of the court, etc., you know that the majority of the Court of Appeal messed up. Because there's no president, the challenge is supposed to be to a president.
Correct.
And Granger was sworn in as president in 2015. No president has been sworn in for this 2020 election. And so you had to have a president sworn in.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the contention that the court put to the parties. You had to have a president sworn in before that section of the Constitution is invoked. I mean, the majority is a five-member court.
Yes.
And the good thing about that five-member court, it's a diverse bench. It's a diverse bench that brings different experiences to the fore. So you heard Justice Witt ask some very insightful questions based on his own experience. Justice Jamadar asked very insightful questions. You know, the Chief Justice asked very insightful questions.
Correct.
There was also Justice Rasnath Lee, who asked some very good questions. And so the thing about it is, it will be interesting to see the judgments that come down from the court, because I know that there's going to be more than one judgment written.
Yes.
We don't know what difference would have been made had Justice Anderson and Justice Burgess sat on the case as well, because Justice Anderson had already sort of started speaking out or pronouncing on Guyana Constitution.
Right.
And they raised that, somebody raised that in argument, that Justice Anderson had presented a paper on the sort of situation that Guyana Constitution presents in terms of these matters and jurisdiction.
Right.
But he couldn't sit because he was conflicted. And so that's probably a good thing that Justice Anderson wasn't sitting on this case.
Correct.
So you have Anderson and Burgess that weren't there, and so you have a real diverse bench, and I like that. I analyzed all 5 of the judges that were sitting there, so I know that it's going to be interesting sets of reasons, and Justice Jamadar, he has been quite a leader in the jurisprudence in Trinidad, and so I'm waiting with anxiety to read what Justice Jamadar has to say about this case.
Correct. Well, you were right, because I found, from our perspective, you are the experienced counsel, the attorney at law, but from our perspective, I found it coming out of the Court of Appeal to have heard Justice Don Gregory Barnes saying that the court is allowed to interpret. Nobody argues with that. But then she went on to use the phrases, and therefore they're making a decision that is disjunctive yet not absurd, quote unquote, disjunctive yet not absurd approach. And they still continued saying the court does not want to venture out of the narrow confines of 177.4, found that it had jurisdiction, and then appended Order 6 of 2020 to the 177.2, and then put valid there. And we saw immediately, even though, and this is my point asking you, even though the Court of Appeal had agreed to have a stay so as to allow the appeal, Mr. Lowenfield immediately then presented a report to the commission.
Yeah, I think that is problematic because Mr. Lowenfield refused to present a report to the commission on the fact that he was served with a notice of application. Right?
Yes.
So he served with a notice of application that has no legal effect because there's no order staying the directions of the commission. Right? It's simply a notice of application. And he refused to present his report. Yet he has an order from the court suspending its ruling for 3 days, and he presents a report. Quite frankly, in the face of it, he acted in contempt of the court. I'm not sure whose direction he was acting under. You're independent, but the court is a different branch, and you have to respect its orders.
Correct.
And so I can see that the Caribbean Court of Justice will have something to say about that, because it was raised in arguments, and his stuff was put in as part of the evidentiary record. So I can see them having something to say, because they were asked to vacate that report that he presented. And if they found that the Court of Appeal acted beyond its jurisdiction, certainly they're entitled to stay that order as well and find that it's null and void and of no effect.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, though, since he acted on his own and gave that report, he can act on his own and pull it back, couldn't he?
Well, I don't know at this point because, I mean, he could rescind the report.
Okay.
You're right. He could rescind the report. He can reconsider any number of things.
Mm-hmm.
But, knowing the posture that Guyana is at this point, I don't think that will be happening. I think the court has, well, I know that the court will have to make an order.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And when the court make that order, then the commission will give him directions.
Correct.
But
go on.
But I also know that he faced two sets of charges.
Yes.
Facing two sets of charges for abuse of public office.
Mm-hmm.
You were gonna ask a question and I interrupted.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I was gonna ask you that notwithstanding the report he would have prepared, and as you said, he could rescind. The fact is that the commission has not met. So the report would not have been tabled. Is there any loophole there that the table is prepared but not tabled or not presented to the commission?
Well, the commission, when on receipt of the decision from the Caribbean Court of Justice,
Mm-hmm.
That hopefully, because we had some problems with the CCJ decision with respect to RAM and others, where the orders were so ambiguous in one way that you could run a Mack truck through it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so we're hoping that the orders this time are going to be quite clear, quite direct, so that everyone knows the rules of the road. I mean, we've been in a state of elections uncertainty for more than 18 months. This is a small country. This is not a rich country.
Right.
Like, how long more can the people prevail under these conditions? So we're hoping that the court gives very direct orders that must be complied with by the Guyana Elections Commission.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Peiters, are you confident that the court will find or could find that it has jurisdiction and just condignly deal with the matter?
From the discussions of the president of the court and the judges, yes, because remember what the court said, or remember the arguments that you heard before the court. There's no president yet. Mm-hmm. You have to have a president. You have to have a president appointed or sworn in. You have to have a declaration and a president sworn in before this section takes effect. And that has not occurred. The only president you have is David Granger, and he was sworn in 2015.
Right.
And so it seems like that's going to be an interesting statutory interpretation of that section.
Right.
The court also looked at other sections dealing with the National Assembly and everything else. So it's going to be an interesting decision.
Certainly. Now, you mentioned a little bit, you do know, you mentioned that there is a court action against Lowenfield as is. And I don't know if you would have heeded what transpired today. So what would be your mindset? What's your comment on what would have transpired most recently in terms of Mr. Lowenfield is not available or has not been available for him to be served? And so he did not turn up to court. And the information we have received is that nobody knows if the gentleman will be available. So that Glenn Hanneman, the attorney for the appellant now, is asking for the police's help because they know Lowenfield has police permission. Is that a conflict now, or could the police help?
Well, he has security. He has security provided by the state, right? Mm-hmm. His security are elite President Guard personnel. So, I mean, the President Guard fall under the Commission of Police Command.
Yes.
And this is a court process. this is a court process. The commissioner of police is required to follow the law. And if Lowenfield is avoiding service of a court process, if this is a summons or a warrant, maybe it ought to be turned into a warrant in the first instance and have him arrested and brought to court on a bench warrant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what would have happened here. If he's there, he has protection of the state. So let's say Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, faced charges, and he has a summons that says he's supposed to appear in court on this day, and his lawyers don't move to court to quash that summons. If he doesn't show up, a bench warrant could be issued for him, and he could be held in the cells until the next court date.
Wow.
And we've seen that happen with victims sometimes.
Yeah.
Where they're summoned to court or subpoenaed, and they refuse to come for whatever reason it is, and they're arrested on a bench warrant. And so that is a power that a judge has or a magistrate has in Guyana, and maybe that is something that could be exercised.
Gotcha. Sure.
But-
Does the action that has been taken, that has been initiated against Lowenfield, is there potential that will be another cause for delay? In other words, if he turns up to court tomorrow or Wednesday or whenever, would that now be cause for another delay to what Lowenfield has to do in terms of his duties at the Secretariat?
Lowenfield duties is to comply with all orders and directions of the commission.
Mm-hmm.
The commission sitting as 7 or as a quorum and making its decisions and directing them. Right. You know, and the law was cited on that. So even if he has issues with the police, and those are not issues within the purview of the commission, those are private charges brought by 2 individuals, Dr. Josh Kanai being one of them. That has nothing to do with the commission. That has to do with the scope of his duties, how he performed his duties from March 4th until whenever that information that led to the charge is covered. Mm-hmm. But the commission, as long as the commission doesn't suspend him as a result of his charges, he has to follow the commission's directions. Now, assuming that he's formally arraigned and he's not allowed to perform the duties of the CEO, there's a DCEO, Roxanne Myers.
Yes.
And there are other people below her who can perform those functions.
Correct.
And they could be directed.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Peiters, as you would have known over the past 2 weeks, we would have been a little bit more in terms of the Prime Minister of Guyana has been forceful in his condemnation of regional leaders who have criticized these elections and the delays and so forth. And Mr. Granger would have come out after all of that. After, for example, Mr. Joe Harmon would have criticized Ralph Gonsalves, and Mr. Granger would have endorsed it. Mr. Granger makes very rare appearances to the public, but when he came out 3 times, and 3 things sticks to my mind, and I want to raise them with you for your comment. He made an appearance once. He said, "I have never seen the SOPs. I have seen a spreadsheet." This is 2 weeks ago he made that statement. Then, after Mr. Harmon would have attacked Ralph Gonsalves and et al., he came out and he says he endorses all of that, and foreigners should not be speaking and doing what they're saying about the country. And then, as of the last 2 days, his other statement, in my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, is indeed a little bit more worrying, because he said Keith Lowenfield has done a good job. He basically endorsed Lowenfield's report that is a contempt to the court as being a good job, well done. What's your comment, sir?
I mean, the posture that David Granger is in right now is a posture in a situation that I would not have wanted to be in. Right? You not only have David Granger being criticized even by his own son-in-law. Right? His party, his son-in-law tells the world that the APNU AFC has no intention of giving up power, that they've lost this election and that they should move on.
Yes.
And come again in 2025, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is Mr. Gaskin's statement, and Mr. Gaskin was
Correct.
a former minister. He's the only person that has given David Granger grandchildren. And so I look more to what he says than what the foreign leader says, because what he says is powerful.
Yes.
Because he lives in the same area, the same compound as David Granger. So David Granger is under a lot of pressure. And I can say that I would not want to be in his position. He's under a lot of pressure to do the right thing, but he's also under a lot of pressure to toe the party line. You see, he's a leader of a party.
Yeah.
And when he communicates, I would imagine, well, he said that publicly. He's on his Zoom chats with his colleagues from the Central Executive Committee.
Correct.
And so, I mean, he can't necessarily throw Harman under the bus. I mean, he can throw a lot of people under the bus, but not Harman.
Right.
So, I mean, Harman was his intelligence officer in the Army. They go way back. They're squaddies.
Mm-hmm.
Squaddies in the sense that they've gone a long way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, of course.
So, I mean, President Granger, in terms of endorsing what Harman says, I mean, that's not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
The same for the spreadsheet, the same for Lowenfield doing a good job.
Gotcha.
None of that is surprising to me. What is surprising to me is that despite all the criticism of foreigners, right? You know, you're criticizing Mia Motley, you're criticizing Ralph Gonsalves, you're criticizing Keith Rowley. All these are eminent leaders of the Caribbean who has found what is going on in Guyana to be quite concerning and quite disconcerting. You're criticizing all of them. You're criticizing all the foreigners to stay out of Guyana business. And yet you hire foreign lawyers to lead the Davis case. And yet the APNU AFC hire foreign lawyers to lead their case.
Yes.
You know,
True.
Mr. Simon is not from Guyana. Mm-hmm. You know, the lawyers that are representing Davis,
mm-hmm.
Eslyn David, they're mostly from Trinidad.
Correct.
You know, these are foreign lawyers. You're splashing Dr. Alexis
mm-hmm.
on the front page of the Chronicle, his opinion that he written privately.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And you're criticizing foreigners. Don't you have the domestic expertise in constitutional law that you could draw upon in these cases?
And I thank you, dear.
Sorry, I had to juxtapose that.
Yes. Perfect. Yes, Leonard.
Yes, thank you very much. Council, I had to sit very quietly and listen to a lot of stuff that you were saying there. Probably for the first time, I think Guyana would be hearing some of those inside stories, if you want to call it that. And I want to thank you for that. Very well spoken. I want to ask you just a clarification as a media person. Back in the Ashman's building, did you see a room mark or has the note a note in it or a placard or whatever it is that says media room? Could you recall that?
Yes, let me pull it up for you. There was an explicit media room. I actually took a picture in the media room.
That would be interesting. York, the reason why I'm asking that, because the media were left outside, they were not allowed in, period.
Hmm.
And when the question was asked, if you, it's a, called a media center, they said, no, per se, it's not a media center, it's not there. But there was a specific media room, though, that's what the media was told. And then all of a sudden, right through this entire thing, with what was happening, media were left outside. It was something our media personnel had come back and complained to us, and I think it was an issue.
Hmm.
So what we could not have seen except the persons that were in there, and that's why I asked Mr. Peters that specifically. But if he's taking
Right.
pictures, all the best, because we need to say that GECOM blocked the reporters on the specific days from entering the Ashman's building where the tabulation process was ongoing. But to come to my substantive question, Council, you would have seen or heard the statements from the Secretary of State, I think it was yesterday, Yog, or the day before,
Hmm.
Mike
Hmm.
Pompeo, and he is saying very clearly, I've instructed my department to find those accountable and take actions. I want to ask you, sir, if in your opinion, this is something that this administration or whoever is should be held accountable, that they should be very fearful of the repercussions of that.
Well, they could be. Let me just show you. Yeah, yeah, there are repercussions that will be had in respect to what went on in Guyana and what continues to go on in Guyana, because of course assets could be frozen, whether it's private or public assets. Visas could be revoked. Families who are here on visas, whether it's in Canada or the United States, can have their visas revoked, and we know that a lot of parliamentarians, whether it's from PPPC or APNU, AFC or PNC, a lot of them have children, whether it's in Canada or the United States or in England.
Hmm.
Yes.
So if the government of those countries decide to take sanctions, certainly it will hit them in terms of their private interests and their families' interests.
Right.
And
Um, it,
specifically, Council, my apologies here. Specifically, I've instructed the department. Is that the final nail in the coffin, or where the wheels of actually start turning pretty quickly on the road to sanctions? I want to get that across.
well, yeah, he can do that, right? He's the Secretary of State.
Hmm.
Hmm.
His instructions go to his Assistant Secretary of State, and
Hmm.
they've got to fulfill those instructions,
Right.
and
Yo,
it filters down to the embassies.
Right.
So, Mr. Peter, so I want to just, if we can take a step back.
Oh,
Um,
hang on a
sure,
second.
sure.
I don't know if you could see the media center clearly there.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yes,
I
yes.
actually took a picture. You see it?
There's a big sign there, Leonard. Media
Yeah,
Center.
you see
Thank
it?
you.
I'm gonna
Yes.
have to ask him to send you the picture. If maybe it's
Yep. Good. Thank you. So, Mr. Peters, I want to take a step back. Now, in about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, excuse me, APNO AFC
hmm
would have said that they believe, in fact, Mr. Bond there's a video of it online. He said that the APNO AFC agents and polling clerks and the GECOM returning officers and all of these people, they were complicit. They were bought out. They were not to be trusted, and that they all caused dead people. Well, in other words, I think he meant to have said impersonation to have occurred, and that people voted multiple times. And to top it off, last week, a week and a half ago, President Granger was on air and he spoke to flaking off. They have basically said 85% of the polling stations and polling booths had voter impersonation. You were an observer on the ground, sir. You would have with your legal lenses, you would have read some of, if not all, of GECOM's protocols and regulations and so forth. What's your response to voter impersonation accusation?
If any voter impersonation took place, and we have no direct evidence of that, it would have been in the rarest of cases.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That is what I would say. If it took place at all, it would have been in the rarest of cases. We have no evidence of that. If you want to make assertions, you want to make accusations, you want to cast aspersions in people's integrity and their character, present the evidence. A lot of people, this election here brought out a monster. It has strained a lot of relationships. It has taken a lot of people credibility and integrity in the gutters from which they will not recover. I mean, James Bond and I go way back. We've sat as counsel on a number of cases, and we've had some quite intense Facebook fights late at night recently. Mm-hmm. I don't attach any significance to anything that James Bond said in respect to these elections and the integrity of the participants that volunteered their time and work on the trying conditions for the Guyana Elections Commission and the observers. Like those comments aren't worth a hill of beans, in my view. Right. You know, the elections, everyone pronounced the elections on March 3rd as credible. Mm-hmm. And that events that took place on E-Day were minor.
Mm-hmm. And would you say...
Sorry, Leonard. Yes. So you would have seen what happened during the recount, and the numbers of ticks and all of the things that transpired thereafter, so that a lot of APNU AFC's followers seem to have believed that the elections were rigged, and rigged in a huge way.
Well, I think that's unfortunate, because we know, for example, we know that the credulity of the assertions were taken to the limit. And one example we know is that, for example, there were 2 PPP votes in Belladrum and one vote for one of the other parties. And there was a challenge for, I think it was at least 19 or 20 voters.
Yes.
So they were challenging the bona fides of that particular electoral station, and PPP had 2 voters.
That's right.
You know, so I mean, it's like you're throwing a whole bunch of stuff in a mix, hoping to catch something. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I find that, you know, it's going to set us back. Mm-hmm. It's going to set us back as a Guyanese people, the sort of stuff that happened in this election. I mean, I have no doubt in my mind, and I can say that most people had no doubt in their mind given the numbers. Mm-hmm. We saw the numbers that were coming in. Mm-hmm. And so most people had no doubt in their mind by March 4th or March 5th that the PPP were winning this election.
Right.
We have no doubt in our minds based on the recount numbers, which matches the SOPs, mm-hmm. which matches all of the information that the observers collected on the ground on March 2nd and March 3rd, that the numbers connect and that the PPP won this election.
So with that said, Mr. Peiters, I want to ask you a question that is, probably a little drawn out. Why do all of this? The world knows that you would have lost an election. Why risk everyone, everything, all reputation? And couple that, please, your answer of that, please, with the following question. Can the PNC emerge and take a respectful position in the near future again in Guyanese politics, or will it be a long-term damage?
I don't know if the damage is long term because if you notice from 2011, the 2011 and the 2015 elections, the PPP was going downhill because people were dissatisfied with them.
Yes.
So people were jumping to a lot of core PPP people found some solace in the AFC because Nagamutu and Ramjatan were there.
Mm-hmm.
And between 2015 and 2019, really, Dr. Jagdeo and his team, they worked to regain the trust of people and to bring back not only their people, but they were focused as well on getting Afro-Guyanese, young Afro-Guyanese to embrace the PPP as a viable option. And they did that very skillfully. The results of the local government election told you something. The PPP gained in the local government election.
Correct.
90,000 people, the PNU AFC lost. And so the PPP that were falling in 2011 and 2015, whatever they did between 2015 and 2019, sent them back up. And it showed in the results, it showed in their donations, it showed in everything.
Mm-hmm.
The PNC is a party right now that has to rebuild. The PNC has a lot of young intellectuals, whether it's in the diaspora or whether it's in Guyana, who are shut out. When I say shut out, because of how that party is structured. And after this election, they're going to have to rethink, because the problem right now is, even if Dominic Gaskin is right that the APNU and the AFC has no intention of giving up power, if the APNU AFC is not declared the winner of this election, if GECOM doesn't declare them the winner of this election, the police and the army has the authority to march them out. Mm-hmm. Notwithstanding that the president has rejected the army in the heydays of his presidency. They've got to follow the Constitution. The same with the police. Right. But there's no doubt that the PNC can reemerge. But you ask another question. You ask a question, why risk it all?
Yes.
I mean, remember that 2020 and onwards was touted a decade of development.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Guyana is getting an infusion, and you hear people talking about the oil money and this and that. Right? I mean, whoever governs Guyana right now, from 2020 to 2030, that is the government that has the chance to build all the highways to modernize Guyana, almost like if you walk on Independence Boulevard, mm-hmm. Independence Square in Trinidad, and you see how their waterfront is developed. Our waterfront isn't developed. You know, our highways aren't developed. You know, and the government that rules Guyana from 2020 going forward for the next decade, that government will have the power and the money to really make things happen in Guyana. So, and the winner-take-all electoral system makes it even more attractive to risk it all.
Indeed. And on that note, Council,
Wouldn't you know, we're almost out of time with our program. Time has gone by so quickly because there are a couple of areas I would really love to engage you on. Let me use this opportunity to welcome you back on another program in the future because there are things that I would really love to get your thoughts on. One, of course, is the big elephant in the room that is called Guyana, and that is racism. We need to have an open chat about that. We need to have a talk about, as you said, the decade and the areas of development that is ahead of us. And also, you're thinking about where do we go from here in terms of constitutional change vis-a-vis the winner-take-all politics. But unfortunately, it's too much to cram into one program. And I must say, thank you so much for being here. But a couple of minutes we have to go. So your closing thoughts, sir.
I mean, the issue of race in Guyana, Guyana is a country of 6 peoples. They call it 6 peoples, including the indigenous, the East Indians, blacks. I mean, East Indians and black Guyanese coexist peacefully in our endeavors. This issue of race, there's no doubt that there's unconscious racism. All of us have unconscious racism within us, except that we control and we modulate it. And by education and training, we can do that, right? But race is used as a proxy during elections. It's almost like what Al Gore told the Breakfast Club host. You can be Democrat. You can't be Democrat if you're black and you're supporting Trump. That's nonsense.
Correct.
You can be black and you can support the ideology of the People's Progressive Party in the same way that you can be East Indian and support the ideology, the goals, and the objectives of the People's National Congress.
Correct.
The problem we have in Guyana is people are using race as a proxy for division, and it's completely unacceptable. It is completely unacceptable, and this election has been one of the worst in terms of using race that way. And it could be probably the advent or the prevalence of social media, and everyone has a voice. Everyone can go on live and say what they like and how they like, But I mean, we have got to, the politicians. President Granger spoke about toning down the scolarity or the scurrilousness, but I don't know whether he's spoken to his foot soldiers so that could be tempered down.
Correct.
Because it's both sides. Both sides, the foot soldiers are involved in divisive racist comments that are unacceptable. Let me make this clear. I've listened to Dr. Orphan Ali, and I think that, I know that if he's declared the president of Guyana, he will be a president for all Guyanese, and he will be a good president. I know that. I've listened to him. He seemed to have a pulse on the issues. He's done a tough interview in Trinidad, and he was totally conversant with the files in all areas that were asked of him.
Correct.
I have no doubt that Dr. Ali will be a very good president if that party is declared. They've got the most votes, and the fact that Lowenfield tried to disenfranchise 115,000 Guyanese is a shame. And obviously he'll have to account for that and other conduct during the election. But I can only wish the Guyanese at home well. I can only wish them well. I can only wish that this election saga comes to an end soon, because it's not the 1% that is suffering. Every day you go on Facebook, people are asking for money to donate hampers to people in need. My inbox, whether it's Facebook, WhatsApp, or anywhere else, it's all public servants asking me for help, financial help, because they're running low on funds. So a lot of people are suffering because of this electoral uncertainty. That has to be brought to an end. David Granger, at this point cannot. I agree with him that he can't concede at this point. He has to wait until that court decision comes out.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense conceding at this point when we have a court decision that's coming out on Wednesday.
Okay.
But when that decision comes out on Wednesday, he's got to make a commitment that whatever the court says, he will not only respect in words, but he will respect in action. And that if the PPP is declared the winner in the National Assembly and the presidency, the will of the people will be respected and the transition will be smooth, orderly, and respectful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. And ladies and gentlemen, I must say, and I'll echo the words of one of our viewers here, Mr. Peiters. Your oratory skills is amazing. Your knowledge is amazing. And on behalf of the people, this gentleman want to say thanks to you. So on behalf of our your Guyanese brothers and sisters, thank you for spending your evening with us, sir. It's been certainly a pleasure to have you, and we look forward to more conversations with you, Mr. Peiters. Do have a wonderful evening, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much
once again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have Mr. Selwyn Peiters, a man who stands for human rights and who stands for all that is good in all that he is doing. And we certainly look forward to more conversations with him because there's so much we all need to discuss together to really open up Guyana and open up our own intelligence and appreciation of what has to be if we are to develop this country of people, of one people, regardless of our race. It's been wonderful to have you all, ladies and gentlemen. Remember to check us out on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and you can always go back to Kite Radio and review and preview and see this video over and over again. It has a lot of interesting and new things. Let me say thanks to Kite Radio crew, to Glenn Lal for making this program freely available, and to you all for joining us. Remember, from wherever you are, do say a prayer for this beautiful country of ours. This is still the best country in the world, and you and I will make it so. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us in Room 592. Have a great weekend. Remember, Monday is a holiday. We'll be seeing you in Room 592 on Tuesday, and Elections Watch again on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. Bye-bye now.